ce ne sono ora.
Sì, but we need to wait. But, the speakers are in.
Cannot see the names. I think we are both allowed on the bottom to decide who is going to join.
Oh, I see some friends. Ciao, Antonia. How are you?
Good, yourself? Ciao, Alberto.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Good.
We have former lecturer in this lecture series.
Oh, I have a title. I can have a crown.
You can have a badge.
Good
honor. I'm sorry I missed your lecture, but I was hoping there would be a recording.
There is a recording
of your lecture, like
there is
the one you did a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you. There is one.
Thank
I'm gonna
you,
send
Antonia. Nice to see you.
it.
Cool. Ciao. I also saw Alberto. Albert Figurt. Ciao, Albert. Another participant, guest speaker in the lecture series. Ciao. It's good to see people who come back. I mean, previous speakers. Ciao.
Ciao, hi, hello.
Hi, Sarah.
Yes, here I am. Okay.
Ciao, Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hi.
Hi.
Alberto, hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, you too.
Yeah, we saw you in the Dynamo Press panel.
Yes.
Yeah, a month ago or something.
Yes, talking about Amazon that time.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yes, oh, thanks. Yes,
really good.
I've been looking for data on that in Italy, which is impossible to find as usual here.
I know. Yeah.
So yes.
No, but this is why it was really amazing, that panel, because they were, you, not they, you were discussing these issues that we rarely hear about in Italy.
Yes. Yes.
So I hope you do more, actually, because ESC is also a very good platform to gather people.
Yes, I thought, because there's been a lot of talk about, working conditions in, Amazon warehouses and so on, but not very much attention on, the sellers side in Italy. I thought that was interesting to try but of course I found loads of data for the United States and nothing for Italy. So so I'll be looking into that. Let's see.
We'll let you know if we see something, but
yes.
I bet you are, I bet you will know before us, actually. You live here, right? You live in Italy.
Yes. And
you're Italian as well, no? Half.
Yes, well, actually, it's funny because my father's American, my mother's English, but I was born in Rome. So,
okay. What a mix.
I have a permesso di soggiorno.
Vabbè. Complimenti.
It's complicated. Yeah.
Okay, great. Just want to say, Alberto, do you see the other speakers?
No, not yet.
I see. Hi, everyone. I see Niels.
Hi, Peter.
And I see Simone.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, hello.
Hi, Niels. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys as well.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. This is Simone. Okay. Ciao, Simone. Nice to meet you. We are basically the department, like communications and media studies department, to organize this lecture series. So that's Alberto, of course, and myself, Donatella, and then I guess the others are also Peter, just to introduce the members of the department.
It's quite interesting. I saw the previous lectures as well. They seem quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was running pretty well before the pandemic. You know, we had full house for Larry Lessig, Paul Preciado.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, really cool. Actually, Paul Preciado, we did it in the courtyard.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Is this the first edition online of this
Yes.
series?
So you guys gonna help us navigate this awkward screen-mediated situation, which makes everything so familiar and
Yeah.
close, but meanwhile we are so distant, and I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
Now
like.
even this conversation should be private, but it's public, like about blurring the lines, you know.
I would have rather come to meet you in person in Rome and hang out somewhere.
Hope so.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, I think for the people who are joining this pandemic edition, we're gonna try to have like a badge of honor, in that when situation goes back to normal, hopefully we can host you as a bonus because you were kindly doing the Zoom meeting. You know?
Would be great.
Yeah, I mean, at least we can offer you a nice meal, you know, and yeah, the day, like today also, these days, like the weather is also really cool.
Yeah, it's
So
spring.
yeah, so hopefully next time we can do something like gathering everybody. Yeah, that's the very first Zoom meeting we host.
Wow.
I'm looking forward to the discussion or roundtable or whatever the format is exactly. I didn't prepare anything, so I'm just going to go with the flow.
Yeah, no worries.
And
no
thank
worries.
you for coming, Nils, because I know that Stefania Emanuele are presenting your book today. I mean, the anthology where your essay is also published. And so they are doing it like, actually, they just finished, I think it was at 5. Yeah, so thanks for making it to our meeting.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's the good thing about these Zoom meetings, right? You can just sit down and just basically
You can jump in.
You're usually already
do endless Zoom meetings. Yeah, also, okay, so Nils, can you post a link to the book? Yeah, okay, I'm gonna definitely post it. I hope you guys can help also like monitoring the chat. Yeah, please, Peter, can you please find the link of this COVID-19 from the margin, like Stefania and Emiliano's book that is on Gert's website?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we should probably get started. I don't know how to manage like delay, like what do you guys think? Because
I imagine that everyone's seen that there's a link to YouTube. So if anyone is having issues with the streaming inside Zoom, this thing is also going out on a live stream on YouTube. So this is just as a point. You can remain connected, but watch it there, even though I think there will be some delay or something to that effect. But just to sort of tell people that, you know, usually these platforms come crashing down at a certain point. So in case that happens, there's a link at the top of the big screen that that sends you up to YouTube, basically.
By the way, Peter, this is a wonderful background you have there. I'm fascinated by it.
It's just records.
It's real, by the way. It's not a digital one. It's like actual physical.
Yeah, it's not
analog.
Yeah. No, I think it's because of it's vinyl that I'm very interested. I'm trying to like look at it, but yeah, it's distracting.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's great. Distracting.
We should probably blur.
In a good way.
We should probably blur the background so not to get distracted. But I think it gives also a sense of intimacy, like closeness in a way.
Yeah, like the opposite of what I have, because we moved in an empty room.
Right. But yeah, thanks, Peter, for mentioning the live streaming. And actually, if you wanna, I don't know what kind of social media you use, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. If you wanna share the YouTube live streaming, please do, because of course, doesn't need to be, I mean, Zoom is a little more complicated, but YouTube can go through also. So if you want to share it, please do. Speaking about platforms, also the funny thing is that we're going to talk about deplatformization in a context in which we are all using platforms. So it's the irony of the situation, right? Yeah. Okay, I was wondering whether, I see that people are coming in, but I guess that we could get started. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I don't know how to manage.
My only issue, my only problem is that I only have until about 10 past 7, and then I have to really go. So my only limitation today.
Okay, so probably we should get started. And in case, I mean, there are other two also. So if you see people like in the lobby, please let them in. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a little introduction on the lecture series. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Donatella Della Ratta. I am an associate professor of communications and media studies at John Cabot University in Rome, and one of the organizers of this Digital Delights and Disturbances lecture series, which we started back in 2019 with 2 very successful editions. In spring 19 and fall 19, where we had the pleasure of hosting really great intellectuals, writers and artists, such as Lawrence Lessig, professor of law and ethics at Harvard University and founder of Creative Commons, and Paul B. Preciado, a queer philosopher and writer and art curator, Audrey Tang, the Minister of Digital of Taiwan, Shuli Chang, also a very famous Taiwanese artist, and actually also other people that are now in the room, also Antonio Hernandez, an amazing scholar and artist from Chile/Canada. Hello, Antonia. Thank you for being back with us. And Albert Figurt, a crazy multimedia artist from Italy. And also he gave a wonderful workshop within the lecture series about desktop films. So welcome back, those of you who have been at the lecture series. And I just want to say a couple of things about the lecture series. So we created this lecture series because, well, we are passionate about the digital and the changing that the digital is introducing in our lives. Or probably we were passionate before the pandemic happened, because now it seems that the digital is taking over pretty much everything in our lives. It's becoming, as we say, the new black, right? After hosting these 2 very successful seasons on site, as we would say today, we have wondered what to do with the lecture series, because spring 20 was kind of unfortunate, because we had already a wonderful lineup of speakers who were supposed to come to Rome, but then we had to stop everything because, as you know, Italy was one of the first countries to be touched by this pandemic back in early March last year. So of course we had to freeze the lecture series, and because the lecture series purpose is to investigate, as the title says, the delights, the pleasures that come together with the digital, but also like the dark side of the networks, then we thought, okay, let's sit a little bit and try to understand, I think, with the hope that we could still host people on site in Rome for the fall season, which didn't happen. And so the series was frozen. And then this spring, we decided that, okay, we're gonna go back online for this edition. This is why we call it Pandemic Edition. And then we're gonna see if, hopefully, in the fall, we can restore the physical on-site lecture series. But for now, so this is our first edition fully online. We thank so much the speakers for having agreed to be in yet another Zoom meeting, because our life is now divided in between teaching online, meeting friends online, you know, doing everything online, watching films, you know, having aperitif online. Anyway, so we thought that this edition should be about the taking over of platforms platforms taking over every aspect of our life because of the pandemic. And this is why we designed this first meeting, which is very much focused on this issue of platformization/deplatformization, which Professor Migali is going to talk about as an introduction in a minute. And I just want to mention a couple of things about the next, because it's a lecture series, so I would like to invite you also to the other events that we are planning. So we have one scheduled for March 30th, which is called Queer Dada. So it's a slightly different because it's more like a performative event with queer writers from all over the world. And then on April 15, we're going to have a debate about hybrid learning, teaching, and the Zoom fatigue. So it's very actually timely as well as a topic. We have as confirmed speaker for this one, Gert Loving, the founder of the Institute of Network Culture and a prominent internet theorist in Netherlands. Then we have Gabriella Coleman. I bet many of you know her for her work on Anonymous. She is a very fine digital media ethnographer. And last but not least, Shannon Mattern from the New School in New York. And she's also an anthropologist who looks at online digital spaces. And last but not least, April 22, we're going to have Jussi Parikka, a very interesting young media theorist who's going to talk about digital contagion. This is the title of the prophetic title of his book back in 2016, and he has written a new introduction to the book. And we're going to go have a conversation because, as you can imagine, contagion is pretty central these days as a word and as a framework, you know. So we're going to talk about viruses in the context of course, immunology, but also computer and media viruses. That's what we are planning for now. So these four events within the lecture series. I want to thank everyone who has made this event possible. So our faculty support marketing office, our intern, and the collaboration, because this is a team event. And so I'm extremely thankful. The Media Lab, who is streaming the event, Professor Phillips, who did this amazing poster, is our artist in residence, and of course, the Department of Communication and Media Studies, and our students, wonderful students that are here in mass presence tonight. So without further hesitation, I will give the floor, the online floor, to Professor Migali.
Okay, thanks, Donatella, for the introduction, for all the thanks. So, so you were saying first of all, I'm Alberto Migali, and I also teach at the Department of Media and Communication, John Cabot in Rome. So we decided to organize this talk because we wanted to shed light on the increasingly central position of platforms. The central position they're occupying these pandemic times. So we are having this conversation on Zoom. We said that we also spend our hybrid classes on Teams, on Microsoft Teams, on different platforms. So before the pandemic, we were noticing this kind of the rise of this platform paradigm, the emerging of this paradigm as a dominant one within our societies, but we wouldn't expect such a boost, such a dramatic rise that happened with the spread of COVID. So in which we had to reorganize also all our lives. Okay, as also Donatella said, the meeting with friends, with families, everything seems to happen through digital media networks via the platforms nowadays. So, I use this term I describe this as a platformization of existence, but might also sound a bit generic. I know that we need also specific situated analysis, okay, to take care of our conditions within the platforms, of the specificities also of the cases that we want to understand and investigate. So it really seems that during these pandemics, the platforms have finally shown their social and also political agency. We saw that throughout the news, and maybe we're going to deepen some of the events we are facing. But in particular, as also Donatella was saying, we wanted to also discuss the possibilities for alternatives, okay, for detaching from this paradigm. So we also wanted to ask, and we asked ourselves this question: can we envision platforms that maybe are not ruled by the accumulation of capital, by social inequality, or maybe this organizational logic of platforms, since it in some way continues also the project of scientific management that we know started with modern capitalism. Maybe they continue this kind of project, and maybe it's impossible to reorient them. Okay, so this is why we have organized this panel. And again, I'm also joined Donatella in thanking the speakers for their presence. So let me briefly introduce them. We have Niels van Doorn, who is assistant professor of New Media and Digital Culture at University of Amsterdam, and he is the principal investigator of the Platform Labor Research Project. You can find in the chat a link to the project, because he earlier on he posted it on the chat, so please check it, and hopefully he's going to tell us a bit more about that. He also published a book on civic intimacies, which is a concept that he developed with his through his ethnographic work within the queer Black community of Baltimore. So he has this intersection of research between inequality, marginality, and also subjective production, and escalation of these social issues within the platform economy. So many thanks, Niels, for being with us today. Then we have Sarah Gainsford, who is a freelance journalist and independent researcher. She's also interested in the inequalities that have increased with the rise of digital platforms. I enjoyed also the book that she published in Italian, also like Niels, couple of years ago, on Airbnb. Studying again the impact of on urban spaces, so the transformation of the cities, of urban spaces, the gentrification and touristification of the cities that also marginalize and create some inequalities. So also thanks Sarah also for being with us today. And last but not least, we have Simone Robutti, who is a member of the Tech Workers Coalition Italia, which is a coalition that in some way attempt to organize the workers of the tech industry, so the workers that build, shape, and also work in the platforms we are interested in. So also in Italy, workers of the platform have begun to unite and struggle and reunion for the struggle. So also he's going to tell us a little bit about that. Okay, so thanks also Simone for being with us. So the idea is to have a sort of talk. So I'm starting with some individual questions to the three of you. So you can start discussing a little bit about your own work in relation to, again, the main topic of platforms, of digital platforms. And then after some specific question, maybe surely we are going to broaden the discussion and going to make some points for the moderation. Okay, so Niels, we can start with you. Would you like to introduce to us a little bit in general terms this research you are undertaking within this group on the Platform Labor Research Project? What are the aims? What are you actually also investigating within the group? And maybe if you can also anticipate a little bit of the findings you are having with this project.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's a lot to cover in a few minutes. I don't know how much time I have, but so maybe first the practical information. Like so the Platform Labor Research Project is funded by the ERC, and it's a 5-year research project, and it started in 2018, February 2018. So we're running to 2023. We're over halfway now, and I say we because we're a team now. It's me, 2 PhD students, and a postdoc, and we each have our own kind of sub-project within the larger project. So what is so my own project, my own research focuses primarily on the ways that it focuses on the gig economy. For to just use the quickest term, and it focuses specifically on how these digital platform companies in the gig economy are transforming how people work, how they gain an income, who benefits from it, who doesn't benefit from it. So it's the Platform Labor Project is very much rooted in ethnographic research. It's a cross-national comparative study that compares the situation in New York City, Berlin, and Amsterdam. So in each of these cities, we do ethnographic field work. I've done 8 months of field work in each city. So I've done, I think about 155 interviews, biographical longer interviews with, especially with people that work in food delivery and app-based cleaning services. So app-based food delivery, app-based cleaning, that's what I focus on most. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but then the other 2 projects, super briefly to give you a broader sense. One focuses more on the platformization of social reproduction, to just throw some terms at you, which doesn't really maybe help, but in another way of framing it is that one of my PhDs looks at how platforms are mediating care work and also volunteering work, so the social sector. And she focuses especially on platforms that govern what we call post-welfare practices and especially volunteering. My other PhD focused on Airbnb, so that's I think the link to Sarah's pieces and research. And then our postdoc tries to kind of, she was just hired, and she tries to kind of pull everything together. Now, what does that mean, pull everything together? What we eventually hope to talk about, and this is actually also the topic of today, it's like how are digital platform companies transforming the relationships between market, state, and civil society actors? That's kind of the grand question that we're eventually, after 5 years, hope to have a sensible answer to, and it should accumulate in a book as well. So, eventually keep your eyes up for that. Now, what ties these things together is that we're trying to find out what do platforms want from us, right? And what do platforms need? And when I said that I didn't have anything prepared, that I was not lying. But in the meantime, when you were doing the introduction, I actually pulled up an old PowerPoint presentation, 2 slides, just so I could just give you a sense of what I think, or what we as a team think that platforms want and what do they need. Just I'll go through it briefly, so don't worry. So some of the things that we think platforms want, first of all, obviously, are data. They want to be the solution to any problem. They want to please and capture their users and capture them by pleasing them. They want to create and leverage dependencies. They want to scale and become infrastructural. They want to diversify their services, which they also conceptualize as verticals, right? They want to govern and order flows of information, of labor, and of capital. They want to extract value from such flows. They want to remain neutral and inculpable, right? They want to gain a sense of what we call platform immunity and kind of ride the wave of platform exceptionalism, which we've seen in many governments' inability or reluctance to regulate properly. This is what we call platform exceptionalism. They want to avoid responsibility, and they want to be seen, again, as exceptional. Now, what do they need? Finally, what do platforms need? I think they need periods of economic crisis and instability. I think the rise of platforms is always kind of following on a crisis or economic downturn. They need a resulting societal need. Right? They always are there when we need a particular thing because we can't get it anymore elsewhere. They need a permissive and or ambiguous regulatory environment. They need policymakers open to experimentation and so-called innovation. And this now, I think the most important maybe for my personal project as well, within the larger project, is they need two inputs. Input one is a reliable and expanding stream of investment capital, and input two is a reliable and expanding stream of labor, especially migrant labor. And that's something I've focused on recently, especially the role of migrants and migration and migrant labor in the gig economy. And because in order finally to get that reliable stream of labor, they need user professionalization. So you see that on Airbnb with the professionalization of hosting. You see that on Uber with Uber Pro, et cetera, et cetera. They need to professionalize by upscaling and for upscaling and revenue generation. And then finally, and I'll stop there, one thing that we're also very interested in, and this actually relates to the Italian context, because there will be a special issue in South Atlantic Quarterly from the Into the Black Box team, which you might be familiar with, people in this group. It will be on platformization and its discontent, and we'll have a piece with our team in there on how platforms try to, we call it actually existing platformization, in which they use partnerships, public-private partnerships, as boundary resources to embed themselves in a local, especially urban contexts. Because platforms moving from away slowly from regulatory arbitrage and evasion of regulatory rules, and more want to have a seat at the table and try to intervene in policy and regulation and actually, shape it accordingly to create the conditions of possibilities for their growth. So that's just very briefly some things that we're, talking and thinking and doing research about. And then there was, I'm sorry.
Voice.
I can't hear you, Alberto.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you did like a good job, like in introducing like everything from the project. Thank you very much from this overview. And you also put like many things on the floor, and again, you already established the connection with Sarah also and her work. So maybe Sarah, do you want to join also Niels, and maybe telling us a little bit more about your interest on specific platforms again? I mentioned your book on Airbnb. I read also your pieces about Amazon. So your question again, also like Niels said, the position of digital platforms in the expansion of social inequalities. So would you like to tell us a bit more about your interest and also what led you towards your research and your investigation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to this talk. Yes, many things that Niels said are very familiar, because I began searching for data on Airbnb. That was my main focus for data on Airbnb in Rome, and it was around 2016, when, it was already empirically evident that Airbnb was having a huge impact on, as you said, on urban spaces, and generating inequalities and so on. Of course, there was no data, so that's how my research started, because I wanted to get behind the narrative, Airbnb's, marketing, communication, rhetoric, which is, I think, a main part of platforms' power, is built around narratives. So we know Airbnb was, presented, the very first claim of Airbnb was, it was a tool for ordinary people to make ends meet, to earn some extra income and so on. And of course, we've seen that might have been true in the very beginning, but then as Niels pointed out, we've seen a professionalization by users of Airbnb. So I think this is very interesting, this narrative, which is it's used not only by Airbnb, but by platforms in general. The most, I would say, common observation I come across when talking about Airbnb and other platforms is about the fact that they democratize services, access to different kinds of services and so on. Airbnb makes travel possible for, you know, for a greater number of people because it's cheaper. So this is the rhetoric. I mean, and it used to be very, very strong around, you know, we remember around 2010, because these platforms such as Airbnb came out of the 2008 economic crisis. They thrived on that crisis because they presented themselves as solutions. You know, on the one hand, solutions for people wanting to travel cheap, and solutions for people who might have lost their jobs and so they could make an extra income by renting their house on Airbnb. So that was a very intricate, you know, narrative there. So I think it's important to focus on the fact that we're much of the time that narrative was focused on the outcome. And this is why when I began researching it a bit on Amazon, I found it very interesting to realize how that had happened, how this shift had taken place. And this is, you know, I'm referring to Lisa Kahn's groundbreaking work on Amazon, where she explains how the shift from structuralism to price theory determined the fact that antitrust legislation, which had been approved, like in the United States 1 century ago, against the creation of monopolies, had become inefficient today because the focus is solely on the output, which is basically identified with consumer welfare, which is identified with low prices, low cost. So I think it's interesting to see how this can be, you know, a constant factor in many different platforms. You know, you have this element of low cost, you have it in Airbnb, you have it in Amazon. And so we're obviously talking about an economic factor. And when you start to look at this, you start to realize exactly, well, where are the costs? I mean, where's the impact of this economic model? Where is it, you know, having an effect? So it's having an effect on cities, on commercial activities, on housing, in the case of Airbnb, on worker wages, for example, and the activity of sellers on Amazon, for example, in another case. So I think this is interesting. I think what is even more interesting is now this rhetoric has kind of been abandoned because it's become so evident that platforms do control their users' activity. Well, that was a strong point, you know, years ago. The whole legal battle between Airbnb and cities in the United States was around accountability, around the fact that platforms were saying we're not accountable for our users' activity. Well, now this has become more and more evident that they actually control their users' activity through various means. And so this, you know, rhetoric of the sharing economy has kind of, you know, it's gone into the background now because it's not just enabling and empowering users, but it's actually actively controlling them, and, you know, and of course then making money off all these different kinds of interactions. And so I think this is interesting if we compare, you know, the post-2008 crisis gave birth to these platform economies and this narrative, and 10 years on after this crisis, you know, it's more and more evident that they're, you know, they've closed this cycle, and so they're not, you know, what they claim to be. And I was even reading the other day, it was very interesting. Airbnb, for example, has bought a subsidiary. It's called Lucky. It's a property management agency, which offers services, you know, such as cleaning and so on. And so my first impression is, you know, Airbnb is starting, maybe, I'm not sure, but it might be starting to act just like Amazon through FBA, through, you know, fulfillment by Amazon, to, you know, which sellers buy in order to automate order fulfillment. And of course, Amazon favors sellers who buy FBA and, you know, against those who don't. So that's one of the ways in which it controls user activity on the platform. So I thought Airbnb might begin to do the same thing. It might begin to favor hosts who buy its property management services over hosts who don't. We might begin to see, you know, this kind of thing also with Airbnb. And so I think it's this is one of the interesting points that's emerged with, you know, with the pandemic and with them growing so much, their activity just blooming in yet another crisis. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, but at least some of that narrative by now we can, you know, we can kind of say it's been, how can I put it?
Okay.
It's been proved.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'll turn the mic off. Okay.
I think we lost Alberto.
Yeah, I think Alberto got booted off the platform. I don't know what happened. I don't know, Sarah, were you about to finish?
Yes, I thought it was me,
trying?
actually. I thought I went offline, but actually maybe it was Alberto.
Yeah.
No, anyway, I was finished. I mean, for this first part.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the connection and apologize. Okay, so okay, thank you very much. You also brought a lot of food for thoughts and points that we also touched with Niels. So I will also leave briefly the word to Simone, because I mean, we are very happy to also have you in this talk, because also we were very interested in knowing also the viewpoint of the workers within the tech industries, within the platform. So I'd like to tell us a bit more also about what are work with and there's also some campaigns. Would you like to tell us a bit more about the work within the qualification?
Can you repeat the question, because you were lagging a lot, so I understood basically nothing.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
A bit better, yeah.
A bit better. So I mean, I was saying that we were interested in having you because we wanted this viewpoint from inside the tech industry. So I know that you did some campaigns recently. So would you like to tell us a bit more about the actual work you're doing within the coalition? So the sense, like, again, the struggles, the practices again of self-education, maybe understanding of the conditions of the workers. So the kind of activities you're doing with the coalition.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's important to frame Tech Workers Coalition as a global organization. You presented Tech Workers Coalition Italy, but we have many chapters all over the world, and many are involved people that are very active on the platforms we are talking about. Maybe not Airbnb, where I don't know many people, but for sure Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and so on and so forth are full of our Tech Workers Coalition people. And while in Italy, this discourse on platform is always a bit predicated on a position of subordination, because we are the province of the empire, and we only get the bad part of platforms. We don't have the privilege to fight in a struggle that has a global resonance. Can you hear me well? Because I see your videos a bit breaking. Yeah, okay. Great. So there are two discourses on platform inside Tech Workers Coalition in according to where you go, where you are located. And in if you go to Tech Workers Coalition in the Bay Area, they believe they have a chance to struggle for control over these platforms and take over the companies. That's the end goal of a bunch of groups in Tech Workers Coalition and satellites. Like Tech Workers Coalition doesn't openly advocate for this, but many of our satellites, like the newborn Alphabet Workers Union, that basically it's the same people that started TWC, or some of the people that started TWC in 2014 are actually part of this union. It was in the news. I don't know if, the news was that in Google, in Alphabet, that is the parent company of Google, they formed this minority union that now is around 1,000 workers based in San Francisco. And they have the open goal of controlling the platform from the inside. And that's, let's say, it's a strategy that we are building, because it's something that is quite different from similar struggles in the past, because these platforms have a global reach. They are produced globally, so even connecting the workers is not too easy. And where the power sits inside the company is not comparable with where the power sat, let's say, in a Fordist factory. There's no single point of failure. There's no physical space to struggle for. You need to have a different kind of approach. And this is one side of the topic, like controlling and unionizing these platforms in order to steer the direction of the company and then eventually getting control. On the other side, one topic that we cultivate, especially in Europe, in the sections in Europe, are platform cooperatives, because they're a hot topic. Like, it's a platform cooperative movement is growing, and even if there are some, let's say, stop and goes because some projects are not doing great or some are failing to meet their, let's say, the desired improvements on the world, there are also many examples of success or viability, at least. And so the idea is this movement is going to grow. I can name a few examples of these, let's say, experimental platform cooperatives. If we are talking about Airbnb, the first name that comes to my mind is Fairbnb. That is a platform cooperative based in Barcelona, but with many Italians, everywhere. And basically the idea is that all the hosts and the developers of the platform are in a cooperative, so they're all owner of the companies. On top of that, there's the idea that the cooperative is bound to invest locally the money that is made locally. So like 15% is they are forced to invest it back in local projects. If this will be successful or not, it's not up to me to say, but the project is going, and it's active, like there are customers. Well, now under Corona, I don't know, but the project is active. And another one, another example of platform cooperative is Coop Cycle, that is a bit convoluted in the sense that there is a cooperative making a software for food delivery platforms. So the idea is to create local food delivery platforms where all the riders form independent cooperatives to handle this problem locally. And for example, here in Berlin, there is one, I'm from Berlin, yeah, I forgot to say. I'm resident in Berlin. There is one platform called Colima2, that is an island in Siberia, so the name is a bit weird. Colima2 is like a cooperative of riders that, yeah, you know, it's like for the customers like any other food delivery app, but behind that, all the riders own the platform. And so TWC always tries to follow these two approaches. One is like collapse or content the existing technology, and the other one is creating an alternative that is viable and not subject to profit motives, but that can be sustainable in the current economy. And this is true on many topics, but especially on the platforms, because there the discourse is more mature than with other technologies.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so you all like brought before like many issues. Okay, I'll try to find some points so we can move on the discussion. Okay, so going back to Niels, I mean, so you mentioned we also were mentioning this data collection, COVID from the margins. That I was also enjoying reading some of your work within that edition. You were mentioning also earlier on one of the points that you discussed in that piece, that is this relationship between public institutions and the platform companies, because in some way we are seeing during the pandemic that in some way these platforms began to be legitimized by this intervention of public institutions that in some way uncritically delegate to them some of the relevant public tasks. So to me, in some way, this is, I mean, for sure, the continuation of the neoliberalist project of deregulating economic and social activities. In Italy, also, we had a huge issue with public schools, because in public schools during the pandemic, Google was massively employed for distance learning with a clear violation of the European law on privacy. So I wanted to, maybe you, Niels, can you expand a little bit on this case of the public-private partnership that you're also studying, and also why do you think that it's so crucial, so decisive to understand this kind of relationship for understanding the whole platformization of live foods or existence, as I call it?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I mean, there's a number of ways into that, into that topic, but I think I should repeat by saying, like, what do platforms want or need? They need a societal need, right? And COVID is a moment of crisis again, and it's a moment of incredible societal and need, also on the level of local governments especially. And we have to not forget, of course, that local governments in many European municipalities have had to do more with less money over time. Right? There's a devaluation or governmental devolution, where local governments get more responsibilities and face more also financial and fiscal risks. So in these positions, local governments, municipalities otherwise, have to, local public institutions then, they have to find ways to make things work, right? And especially in a pandemic where there's particular logistical needs. that come up. So this is the one example that I'd like to bring up here. There are others, of course, but there's particular logistical needs that come up where platforms, delivery platforms, can say, hey, we have a lot of, we have a whole infrastructure, a whole system here. We can help you because we want to do good. We are good people. You know, we are good companies. They all have corporate social responsibility documents, and they're like, we're doing this. And in some cases, governments are, especially, you know, the more needy they are, the more and open to innovation they are. It depends, of course, on what politicians are in these municipalities, but they are open to experiment with them and to help them. And then, for instance, you see how DoorDash starts to deliver food to particular students in need with a particular handicap, for instance, or a particular other in a precarious situation. They're at home. So they, you see how Airbnb, you know, also, for instance, in relation to refugees and to other types of victims of other crises, has its open homes project, right? So there's several ways and several examples you could talk about where not only do platforms want to co-govern, they want to start to take over particular functions, not take over completely, but they start by complementing, supplementing. But the whole thing that platforms do, and here I'm following Benjamin Bratton's like really great work on platforms and Stack, is that he calls it generative entrenchment, right? So you give them a little finger, and then they pull your finger and they pull right, you know, the whole arm. And so they, but in a more technical term, they increase the opportunity cost. So they make it harder for you to leave and they generate these dependencies. And they make it cheaper for you to stay, right? And they do so oftentimes through datafication. Right? They say, hey, we have all this data. Not only can we do this service, but we can also have a lot of data on this service, and we can optimize it also for you, right? And we can share this data if you want to, but of course, quid pro quo, because platforms are the ultimate quid pro quo, right? And the quo is eventually larger than the quid. So I don't want to stretch that analogy any further, because then I'm just gonna, burn myself in the ground. But so the thing is that why we should be careful about this, because in itself, platforms are not a bad thing, but highly financialized corporate platforms are a real problem. And that's where also the predatory element comes in. Because why can they keep losing all that money while they're doing all this stuff, including these partnerships? Because they have a huge runway. Then that runway is all that finance, all that investment capital, including from sovereign wealth funds and everything. So the public, again, is hugely implicated in this whole platform economy. And if these platforms are in a sense too big to fail, if they fail, a whole pension funds, et cetera, and other things are just and also municipal funds go down the drain as well. So we're completely mutually complicit and dependent on each other. So platforms are super dependent on us, but we get increasingly dependent on them. And since platforms are highly financialized entities that are leveraged by by an investor class that wants to see a return of investment, that essentially will make them predatory platforms that maybe in the beginning subsidize all kinds of things. The finance capital subsidizes a lot of our things. That's why everything's so cheap. But eventually that will, they want a return. So then we see a huge extraction, not of just data, but just, costs will rise, social costs will rise, and we'll be in deep shit. So yeah, I'm a pessimist when it comes to this.
Okay, so, very pessimist. I mean, at least you are offering some good points. I mean, maybe we can discuss later on about that, because maybe my own opinion is I'm even less optimistic than you. Okay, so just try to again maybe bridge also with Sarah, because you were both noting this idea of the crisis, this kind of need of the crisis, and also as Sarah was discussing, and that's kind of the trigger also of your work, Sarah, and of your work on Airbnb, the kind of crisis. At the time that you were doing your investigation was the financial crisis, that cities were facing. And you were telling us that Airbnb took advantage of this crisis to, in some way, reinforce their status. And again, the other point that it's interesting, this idea of the narrative, and also Niels were saying that they offered themselves in some ways the saviors, the solution of the crisis, of the recession, and they offer like themselves in this kind of, they frame themselves in this kind of narrative as the solution, the way out from the crisis. So, I mean, do you also have this kind of feeling for the current crisis, Sarah, that they are offering themselves in this kind of way? So it's a recurrent kind of trope they're following, this one of like offering themselves as a solution or as a way out.
Yes, I'm almost, I must say, quite pessimist about the future. Yes, I mean, they're great at offering solutions to problems which they create. So, I mean, it's all, you know, it's this circle where we've seen that with specifically Airbnb, you know, to offer a solution for an extra income. And in a certain way, it's, I think it was Morozov who said it's almost like a form of, you know, privatized welfare, because all this is linked to, you know, to the collapse of public welfare. And in Italy especially, this is very much linked to problems in the labor market. I mean, after the most recent laws, wages have gone down, and it's particularly the youth is suffering from, you know, suffered the most in the past crisis and is suffering the most now. Also because, I mean, I think of Rome, for example. I mean, one of Rome's main economic sectors is tourism. Well, I mean, what kinds of jobs does tourism offer? It offers very low paid jobs, precarious jobs. And so it's a circle. So people working in that sector are the same people who are unable to pay rent, which is going up because of Airbnb. And so this is something that I really strongly believe the public sector, politics needs to deal with. There needs to be a line drawn between, you know, who can offer what solution, because it's evident these solutions are only making matters worse. And I often write, you know, also about the whole housing issue here is basically the fault of, you know, of the absence of housing policies. So that just left a gap which Airbnb just filled basically. And so this is why I'm kind of pessimist, because I don't see much difference now with the pandemic. I don't see the political class acknowledging the need to regulate platforms. I mean, Italy is one of the few countries where Airbnb has never been regulated. I mean, we have the most ridiculous laws on Airbnb. I mean, recently the distinction between occasional and professional use of Airbnb was drawn at, I think it's 4 apartments. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, and up until, you know, 4 apartments, you are considered like an occasional host. I mean, you could be making loads of money with 4 apartments on Airbnb, and that income is taxed at a lower rate than the rates, you know, taxing income from labor, from jobs anyway, parenthesis. So there's no awareness of this. And so if there's no, you know, if we see no action by the political class, I'm just, you know, I'm really afraid that the scenario, you know, when tourism picks up again, will be even worse than what it was, because Airbnb was in part brought on by the financial crisis as an answer to poverty and to, you know, people facing economic hardship. And so why shouldn't we expect the same after this crisis if we don't have, you know, strong public intervention? And I'd like to just finish off by saying, I know the Fairbnb cooperative, I think it's great, it's a great idea, but unfortunately I think it doesn't have much of a chance of succeeding until Airbnb is not regulated properly, because it can't compete with that kind of presence. So that's my idea. I mean, I wish Airbnb were regulated much more than it is now.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can also going a little bit more in depth on that. But I wanted also to ask Simone a little bit more on what he said earlier on, because you, I mean, yeah, Simone, you kind of jumped to the kind of cooperative and a kind of alternative projects. But I wanted to ask you something else, because recently we also read the news about the, as you were telling us also, the unions. You were telling us about the unions that were formed in Google, but also we read news about the vote for the unions in Amazon in the US. So it really seems that from the first step of this kind of international movement, which was about protest, because like in last, before the pandemics, we were witnessing the protests of the riders, of the Uber drivers. Well, it really seems that at this moment we are in a kind of new scale and this kind of level of organization. And solidarity maybe. So are you also kind of witnessing this kind of movement that I'm also noticing? And also my other question is, since you also mentioned like the traditional industry, so the kind of industrial modern capitalism, do you think that this kind of new level of organization can again lead to something was like the success maybe in the terms of social democracies that the previous generation of workers and unions within the labor movement obtained in the last century? Can you see some parallels also with what happened in the past?
Yeah, I will write a whole book about it. It's such a simple question. No, yeah, so I will try to be short, but let's say I see the convergence of at least three phenomena that, I mean, this is a bit my interpretation. I see three forces leading this process that are all getting to maturity, or to visibility at least, not to maturity, but to visibility kind of concurrently. And one is traditional unions catching up with the new forms of labor, the new space of work, and so on and so forth, where so far they didn't think it was relevant to enter these spaces because they couldn't understand, let alone devise effective strategies. So, and this is true about software development, about fulfillment centers of Amazon, that while were similar to traditional logistics, still presented different challenges, a different kind of fragmentation, as is true in general for international logistics. So now it's much more common to have foreign companies doing activity locally. Like, for example, these days we are seeing strikes in Italy in a Nippon Express that is Japanese, and they don't have the same kind of industrial relationships that they might have with an Italian equivalent. And this is one. So traditional unions catching up in the last 5 years, sort of. Another one is what is usually referred to as alt labor. So alt labor is everything that is not traditional unions, basically, that try to improve working conditions for the workers. And the alt labor movement is a thing that started outside tech and it's much bigger than this, but we are seeing, at least inside this alt labor galaxy, two forces. One pushing from the technical side, like Tech Workers Coalition, that while advocates for tech workers in general, it's mostly composed of white collar, middle class programmers, technical people, designers, and so on. So people that sit at the desk, let's say, to stay generic. And another form of alt labor, like the rider organizations, are not necessarily unions in the traditional form. Even in the legal form, even sometimes they push the boundaries of what is a worker organization, and they are very fluid, very distributed across cities, across nations. So for me, this is a different form of organization. And clearly they have a gigantic challenge that they don't share a physical space at all. And in the beginning, they had their own platforms, like Deliveroo or whatever had a chat for the city, a chat for the country, in which the workers could exchange information. So then we're like, they're using it to unionize, better take it out. And so they canceled these common spaces, and then it's hard to organize workers in these conditions. It's not, all the abstract analysis you can do at your desk doesn't fix the problem that these people are writing the whole day and there's no way to get to them. So, but now we are devising strategies to contact them, not me personally, not me, but as workers, we are devising strategies to reach them out and organize them. And we are seeing big victories throughout Europe and the US. Well, most in Europe, in UK the other day, in Italy yesterday. We are seeing big victories that are very promising. And this is one side of the problem. The other side is the one that pertains more to me. So organizing the cognitive work of producing software, that is a completely different issue. So here we are seeing this galaxy of organizations, especially in the US, where there are like literally hundreds of small organizations that are maybe specific to a company, maybe specific to a topic, maybe specific to an intersection, like there's Amazon workers for climate change, that it seems very specific, but it's created on the assumption that having this positioning can help funnel workers that are privileged into action, like push them into action, where just solidarity or like more traditional needs for unions don't apply, because many workers are still too privileged. And I believe the key here that I would like maybe to communicate to this public, that it's very comes from I assume from a very different background than mine and the one I move in, is that from a technical and organizational point of view, we are tech workers. Technical tech workers are, let's say, in a key moment in which they have a very high level of dissatisfaction with the current state of things. For example, all the problems we are talking here are discussed to some degree in Silicon Valley and in other tech spaces. And they have a very low level of the skilling, because digital technology is still very young, very immature, and very labor intensive also on the side of software production. And also a deep disorganization in the technological elite. Like sometimes I see, Silicon Valley kings like Zuckerberg and Bezos and so on as a organized coalition against the US state or against, to control them or whatever. No, they are in conflict inside their own companies and across them, and they fail to push back against, together against regulation, and they do lobbying by themselves, basically. And that's not really my field, and I'm not a policymaker or whatever, but inside their own companies, there is a power struggle in which they are legitimized by technological aristocracies, basically. So the high level of these organizations that are not homogeneous in ideologies and positioning and interests. So this is going to end eventually because they will resolve this conflict and one dominant tech elite will emerge. But we believe it's still not the case. And so we need to move quick. And yeah, and I don't see this discussed often, this window of opportunity that is now for us, for tech workers mostly. Because from the outside, this doesn't apply.
Okay, thanks, Simone. Thank you very much. Yeah, let me thanks Niels for being with us. Unfortunately, he had obligation, so he had to leave us. Okay, so maybe we can try to open a little bit the discussion. So let's start to see if there is someone who would like to join and maybe make some comments, or if it will be me again raising new points for discussion. Is there any question or comment that participant wants to make via chat or intervening in the discussion?
I could maybe ask a question just to sort of bring it back, if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Yes, for sure.
I mean, just a very quick question, but one of the things, I mean, one of the points that moved us to sort of...
And then we'll have Will, Peter, after you. Huh? After you, there is another hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Will's hand, so he can go first. I didn't raise my hand, I'm sorry. So
No, it's sorry, thank you. First, I would just like to thank all of our speakers so far. This has been very interesting to hear. I would like to hear a little bit more, if possible, on, I remember at the very beginning, the discussion of the things that these platforms want, one aspect being, of course, professionalization of the labor, and then another on the funding aspect. And there was a little bit of mention, but I'm wondering in the long run what happens, you know, the functionally, you know, infinite, you know, venture funding has to dry up at some point. How do these companies handle that? Does it return to a more traditional monopolistic paradigm where price does become the competitive factor or the exploitive factor rather than the low valuation that we're seeing currently?
Okay, thank you very much, Will. Sarah, do you want to maybe touch upon this issue? You also been studying this with Airbnb. You were mentioning it, this kind of issue of the professionalization of labor and also financial funding.
I'm not sure if this is true, actually, if the financial capitals, why would you say they're drying up? What is interesting is, I mean, it's pretty well known. I mean, there've been so many articles on this, how before, even much before the pandemic, they were saying, you know, the innovation cycle in the Silicon Valley had ended basically because there had been such a concentration of capital in the same, in different cycles, but in the same, I can't think of the word in English, the same actors, basically. There was an excellent article in the New York Times showing how going back to, you know, to the 70s, capital had been flowing into certain chosen, basically, startups and firms who were selected to be successful. And so the whole, you know, innovation setting in Silicon Valley had basically dried up because, I mean, it was just favoring the same the same people, basically the same investors who were investing in themselves, basically. And so that was interesting. I was looking also at this by, the physical urban point of view, and there were already, firms leaving and people leaving before the pandemic. And now, of course, that has exploded and everybody seems to be leaving Silicon Valley and San Francisco. But it was interesting how this whole thing of innovation seemed to be over. But that doesn't mean, that the funding is over, that the financial profits are over, and so where are they going? That would be an interesting, I think, theme to to investigate. What is being financed now? What kind of new ventures are being financed by capital ventures and so on? So that would be an interesting question. But we've seen basically even it was interesting. I mean, even a vertical, physical verticalization in Silicon Valley. I was reading reports on how even the physical space was changing because of this concentration of capital. So low-rise offices were becoming high-rise, skyscrapers. And so you could even see this physically, this kind of concentration of capital. But I don't think that is going to, that means that there's less capital going into certain areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, that's really interesting because it's a whole kind of environment with the incubators, with all the monies that are given without any kind of immediate revenue. So we all know, these kind of stories, the Amazon that started without doing any kind of revenue, investing just money and logistic to get the kind of central position, and then becoming the kind of monopoly that it's nowadays. Like, again, we all read the Bezos has become the richest man in the world. Peter, you want to bring a point there?
Sure. If there's no other questions, I think Brunella has a question here on the, Professor Tomarini has a question here on the chat. So maybe I'll just read that for those of you who are not monitoring that. Okay, it's a question for Simone. And I don't know if Brunella, do you want to ask it yourself? Now I'm muted too. You're muted, Brunella, I think.
Sorry. No, I'm just looking for it. I can't find it. I can't find my question. Anyway, I'll make it again. I was very interested in your last consideration about the fact that these great giants of the socials, Facebook, Amazon, Bezos, etc., they're not a compact group of people in power. They have mutual conflicts or conflicts within themselves. Couldn't that be a sign, rather than being a sign of a future common agreement, rather a sign of weakness that might lead to the development of the so-called digital unions that are just starting being a good counterpoint?
It's complicated. Like, I also am not an expert on this topic. Like, there's a whole world of analysts that try, mostly like financial analysts, trying to devise these social structures, these social networks, but inside the companies or across companies or across management boards. And there was there was a nice study on this, but I don't remember from which group. And it's something that in this crowd somebody heard already, but I don't really remember. That was tracking basically the movements of people in the boards of tech companies and who was position with whom, and all the news about like they had this conflict on this topic, so he resigned or whatever. So it's complicated because if we go on a micro level, it becomes gossip. If we go on a macro level, what you are saying is, I think it's too early to say, I talked about it because too often these people are presented as omnipotent oligarchs that with technology and their magic can achieve anything. And it's not true. Like there's still a huge level of social conflict, of elite conflict in there, and it is relevant to these dynamics. Then the reaction to unions might depend on it or not. Like in Amazon, for instance, the let's say the culture of union busting and anti-union practices started from the beginning because they always had workers in like let's say warehouse workers or manual workers that were more prone to unionization. And so they developed a culture of anti-union practices. While in Facebook, or especially in Google, that was extremely liberal and optimistic about freedom of communication among employees, in Google, let's say they are naive. They are still naive. They started just in the last 2 or 3 years to develop anti-union practices, but before they were truly oblivious to the free, like the workers organized protests on the platforms of the company, and you would expect that they were monitored to counter these protests, but it wasn't true. They were just clueless because they are much less powerful and capable of monitoring than what we imagine. And this is not weakness. It's because they have the power to conflict in this way. They're just learning how to, and this is true for the tech sector in general. Like there are generations of managers and company owners that never had to deal with unions, right? Because programmers, software developers have no clue about this stuff. That's why Tech Workers Coalition exists, to create this culture. But in some way, they are not vaccinated to unions, and there's still a critical window in which both at the micro level and the macro level, there can be an impact that like the window will close in the future because they eventually are going to learn and fight back with the power they have.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think this fully answers what you're saying, because it would be nice to tell you like Zuckerberg had a fight with this and this vice president, but I'm not too much into that. There is analysis like that. It's just not something I follow too much, but it exists.
Okay, thanks, Simo. Thank you very much. Thanks, Brunella, for the question. Peter, are you still interested in making a point there?
I don't know. Sure. I mean, I'll ask my question, and I think it has to do with what we were, the way in which we thought of it. No, and I think the discussion now has been going primarily along the sort of idea of platformization. But I think one of the elements that we sort of at least thought about the event today was also around the question of deplatformization, no? And how that term sort of takes on contradictory meanings. No, at one level, there's, I think, some of what we've been saying today, that deplatformization from one angle is a positive thing. We want to detach, we want to reform, we want to challenge, this ruling paradigm in a way, something that existed before, but definitely has accelerated now with the quote unquote pandemic. But deplatforming is also a term that sort of comes from before, and I think platforms are involved in them, even though the origin of the term doesn't necessarily have to do with media platforms. No, the idea of being able to deny speech in a way, which is something that we've seen happening sort of recently. Of course, we're all happy when racists and fascists are not allowed to speak at some level, but nonetheless, that still demonstrates the power of the platforms to sort of allow and allow to speak or not. So even in terms of labor sort of instances online, how do we reconcile this desire to want to retreat from the platforms as a sign of resistance, but also the power that the platforms themselves have to take the platform from under the sort of, to take the platform out or to shut it down from the people that they don't want to sort of keep on their own platforms. I don't know if Sarah wants to answer this or Simone.
No, I'll try. If I've correctly understood, I think working specifically on Airbnb, but not only, I think that the point is, you know, we can use that technology basically, but it's about who controls it. So of course, so I mean, I'm a great fan of the idea of cities developing, for example, platforms, but this could be, you know, true for many things, for transport, for using that kind of technology. And you know that I know, you know, Barcelona started working on that, so there has been some work on this idea. I think it's, you know, it's basically, it's about data, and this is, you know, this has been said before. It's about who controls data and the disparity between what public administrations in Italy, but not only, have access to, or have the, you know, the means to gather and to work and to do with that data is just, I think that's what, you know, we should be dealing with, what public administration should be dealing with, instead of just handing over, for example, public services to Uber, to platforms and that. And we've been seeing that. I've been reading about, you know, the idea that Uber take over some public transport in the States. So, I mean, I think that huge disparity in the use of data should be central in any future debate. Also because in Italy, for example, I mean, Airbnb is in charge of collecting, you know, tourist tax and things like that. And so that becomes central, but there's not much awareness of this, at least here. So, I mean, the ideal solution, I think, would be for cities to be able to run their own. That's what I was referring to before. I mean, Fairbnb could be an excellent alternative substitute to Airbnb. But of course, I think a city would have to ban Airbnb before promoting Fairbnb.
I can also answer to some degree. Like I'm personally pretty pessimistic about state intervention for tourism. One is better on specific issues for sure, like the 1% is that with technology in general and new forms of new markets, the case is that now the creation or the velocity of digital capital in creating new platforms is too fast for the state to intervene. So the fact that we solved the Airbnb problem doesn't mean we have a general solution, you know? And so it cannot be a satisfying solution to say, let's wait for the problem to happen and then let's put a patch on it or let's ban it. Because it's a pattern, like all startups as an end goal, like when they start, both in the minds of the seed investor and the minds of the founders, the idea is to become Uber, Airbnb, and all these other platforms that can go around existing regulations by design, because they create a new technology that enables to avoid regulation. And this will always be the case. Like there will always be a new technology that can evade the current regulation, and the state will never be able to make policies faster than the Silicon Valley makes technology. So yes, it's important to solve the problems we have now, but it's not a general solution. So in my wet dreams, one state intervention that will work will be to apply the same logic that is applied to drugs, to medicines, that it should be applied to software in general, not just platforms, but software in general. Clearly now it's utopic or dystopic according to you, who you ask, but the same was true in the 19th century for drugs, because until there were scandals where 50,000 kids died, everybody was like, okay, we shouldn't regulate this. Come on, if one person dies here and there, it's no problem. And the problem was invisible. It was hard to spot if you weren't a doctor. Then the doctor that was prescribing medicine and seeing all these patients dying maybe had a clue, but it's the same clue we have now about platforms to some degree. And so I think eventually in the very long term, if everything proceeds with the business as usual, eventually we will converge on that solution, because it will make this loop, this chasing, unsustainable. On the other side, the needs that are rearranging of society around platforms is there with alternatives, and there is a whole movement that tries to achieve this. I can think about the Fediverse that wants to struggle to let's say retain data control locally, so having the same behavior of a platform without giving up data control. I don't know if you are familiar with the Fediverse. Briefly, it's a series of tools that can talk to each other, and everybody can host by themselves, or a small community, a small organization can host an instance, and they can talk to each other. Example, software that is basically a copy of Twitter, for good or worse, it's basically a copy, but every organization can host their instance, but you see the tweets, the equivalent of tweets, from other instances. So you post your content on your local server and you have control, but people can see, if you allow them, they can see you from outside this instance. So this is good to some degree because it leaves control of the data, and it is bad because if we are talking about the far right deplatforming, the effect is that they can host their own software and stay in their bubble and organize with being invisible from the outside, because they have their own instances of Mastodon and whatever. So beyond Mastodon, there are all a series of tools like PeerTube that copies YouTube that is trying to be developed. I'm quite pessimistic about it because it reproduces the same mistakes of the mainstream platforms that they're trying to replace. And I always say, like, Facebook is a mine full of miners and coal and dust. You cannot turn it into a school, right? And what matters, a mine with books, and it's not a school. It's not enough to make a school. So the structure, the intention behind the design of Facebook that is intertwined with the needs it satisfies, like the need for visibility and attention, shouldn't be chased in that way. So the Fediverse in itself is not an answer, but there's a lot coming out, like OpCycle, as we said before, to contend the data control while fulfilling the needs for the user, because you always have to deal with that to generalize your strategy.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Simone. Yeah, I mean, I also have some comments about this, but there is someone else who would like to join the discussion and make a question or point. Because okay, please raise your hands or write in the chat. Because I also, I have to be the moderator, but I also have comments on this because I also share with Simone, because we were discussing also earlier on about the possibility for regulation. So we heard from Niels that he is in favor of and maybe regulation can be a solution. We also heard from Sarah the possibility, even though she told us that she's also a bit more pessimistic, that the problem with the regulation still is who owns the data. And I think I'm on the same line with Simone to say that, again, if these infrastructures are precisely built on data extraction, even though the data are managed locally, and in some way the framework still is the neoliberal one, also the alternatives can be problematic. So is there any question, or it's again my turn?
If I want to ask a couple of quick questions, if there is, but only if there is not anyone else from, yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Caitlin.
Hi. Hello,
Yes.
Professor. Hi.
Hi.
This conversation about the governments regulating these platforms, it's making me think of the recent situation in Australia between Facebook and Google. So Australia, I'm not sure if, I'm sure you guys have, but they asked Facebook and Google, because so many people use Facebook and Google for news, it's really hurt, news publications and, it's kind of contributed to the decline of journalism, so to speak. And so Australia had asked Google and Facebook, for every news link that you share, you have to pay the publishers. And Google and Facebook, they were threatening oh, well, we just, you won't have, our services in Australia. I think they kind of realized that their bluff didn't really work, but it does kind of make you wonder about how much power that these companies have. I mean, they're the richest companies. I don't think anyone in history has really had this much power. And so I think it's interesting because, like I said before, these are private corporations going up these governments. And when talking about, these governments regulating these platforms, I just think it's interesting. I just think it's very interesting because it's not quite two countries going to war with each other. It's just these very wealthy billionaires going against these politicians. I don't know if you could want to add to that, but.
Yes, thanks, Caitlin. Peter, you want to?
I think Caitlin's question is very much to the point, and I just wanted to add that maybe one of the reasons why, that, as she said, Facebook's bluff didn't work, just to tie it back to Brunella's question before, to Professor Antomarini's question before, is that unlike Facebook, Google seemed to, before Facebook did, come to some kind of compromise or some kind of sort of deal that sort of pushed Facebook to have to deal with that. So that might show, I agree that that conflicts are more wishful thinking than anything else, but because the interest sort of lies in the same place. But nonetheless, you have these moments where there's jostling for position that might open up certain possibilities. But I think Caitlin's question should go to Sarah or Simone.
Yeah, I don't really have I don't know if it's a question or what, but let's say this is a discourse that it's, at least in my bubble, is very present, in the sense that it's very clear that at least since 2015 or 16, at least Amazon and Facebook are playing publicly a different game to position themselves as alternatives to the state. In general, corporate power in the disgregation of nation states always tries to contend a lot of things that until a few years ago were sacred to the control of the state. But we can think about Facebook and Amazon coming together for once to propose Libra, that was the currency proposed developed by Facebook, a cryptocurrency. that should have been attached to WhatsApp. And that wasn't necessarily a business move in the sense that they knew it wasn't going to pass, but they wanted to explore the boundaries of what they could do. And at least Facebook is been doing this very publicly in the sense that they challenged the state many times, or the European Union, to see how much they can flex their muscles and get away with it. And sometimes they do it in the sense that they at least postponed their let's say with Schrems 2 and the privacy. If you apply your law that we know it, we leave completely, and that means a huge economic damage to all the business owners that are on Facebook, all the small, precarious workers that need to work through Facebook, and so on. Will be a disaster because you will, have a lot of complaints. So what they were saying was like, yes, we know we are in the wrong, but we want to get away with it anyway. While Amazon, Google, IBM, and so on, they always done this more in private, trying, like Amazon clearly plays a lot on tax dodging and having special contracts to avoid taxes. And that's, if you do it once, it's business. If you do it everywhere, it starts having geopolitical power, because you're like the church. You don't pay taxes on the ground of what you are, and so you receive a special treatment, and you shape the local spaces like willingly. Like Airbnb, maybe it's a side effect of their market, but Amazon, with their warehouses, they can reshape entire regions and not being accountable for that, because we do it for free, or we give money to the city to do it. That's buying out public power, like state power. And if you do it systematically, as Amazon does, with all the money they have, it starts having a different implication. So yeah, we are seeing the tech comp, or like last thing I will mention, in Nevada a few days ago, this became blatant in the proposal of these companies with a certain size to be able to make their headquarters, or better, to have presence on Nevada state land and not being, let's say, not be subject to the state law. They, so like an exception, like they can self-regulate, they can police them, they can do everything independently. That is cyberpunk dystopia from 0 to 100 immediately. And yeah, again, this is all part of a process that to me is quite transparent. I don't know if it is for the public, but from the inside, it's clear that they are playing this game. Facebook especially, and very goofily at that, I think, because first Zuckerberg tried to candidate for the Dems. Then it was like, no, nobody likes me. It's a stupid idea. Then they tried Libra. They tried various things to try to, contend more and more spaces to the state, because sometimes there's not even a business logic. It's more like desire of grandeur. They want, it's the end game. Like they're so big that they cannot expand in their own markets. So they either finance other enterprises, or they start playing the game of a state just because they can. And maybe with the business damage, because clearly Facebook is getting worse in its positioning with the states and is very close to being regulated, doing good to their business. That's my opinion. Then it's much more complicated than this, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't have much to add to what Simone said, but I mean, it's kind of obvious the platforms are starting to control social interactions, users' social interactions. But I wanted to add on something on journalism, because that is something I've also been reflecting on, and of course, platforms have had a very heavy impact on journalism, on the quality, on media outlets. Local media outlets have struggled. But then, because this was something that came up recently, I was part of a meeting on, because there is the need for new forms, new models of journalism. It has to, we have to evidently find new models, because there's no pluralism. There are, these big outlets. I'm referring to Italy, but other countries, don't have much more pluralism, at least in Europe. So it's interesting how actually there are a few examples of very small journalism realities, such as, for example, in Italy, I think of Valigia Blu, which has done an excellent job of it. Basically, it finances activities with crowdfunding, but it has managed to create a community of readers in the past few years, which have become very, very affiliated to Valigia Blu, and so they are supporting their work economically, and I think that's a very interesting example of a possible model for I think new forms of journalism, which also kind of use the social network dynamics and mechanisms to create this community of readers. So that was just something that came into mind, apropos of Facebook and Australia.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Sarah. And I mean, because at the end of the day, even though they in Australia this regulation, practically they are giving the chance between the platforms and the News Corp to just manage between themselves the agreements. So practically they can decide the amount of money they want to invest in this kind of relationship. So practically the Murdoch and the Zuckerbergs are just talking each other and managing the issue. Okay, Donna, you also wanted to make some final points,
yeah,
or
I'll try to be very quick, but there are like so many issues at stake. But I want to mention, first of all, I do agree with what Simone said about, when he talked about Mastodon or Fediverse or PeerTube, that, I mean, there should be a solution beyond the tech solutionism, because adopting platforms that kind of mimic the same social interactions that are happening on mainstream platform, it's definitely not a solution. So not just because they are open source, they're going to propose an alternative model. And I don't think that the solution should come from tech solutionism. I think that what you refer to, like the COPS experiments, that's something much more interesting to look at, because basically the principle is taking ownership. I think that we have forgot, especially in the past maybe 20 years of like this tech euphoria, that it's very important to own the means of production, quote unquote. And yeah, so we should probably go in that direction, which is sharing the means of production and owning, making sure that we own them. Otherwise, there will be no other fancy interfaces, alternative interfaces, because in the end, if the means of production stay in the hands of few corporations, then it's pretty much the same situation that we were already confronted with many decades ago. But I also agree with what Sarah said, a very important thing, which is that in order for fair BNB to succeed, the government should ban Airbnb. So there is a matter like of regulation as well that should go on parallel together with developing alternative solutions. So I don't think we can work out solutions that are just in the shadow of the mainstream. We should involve governments. And actually, when Sarah was talking about the Italian government, I was like desperate for what she said. I would have expected such a thing. But it's so unfortunate that in this country, we have so many bright minds, people like working everywhere that are very much on the top of these issues. But unfortunately, when it comes to governments, we have no clue. But it's important that our politicians are made aware that regulation should be implemented. So I was thinking, as she was speaking, that maybe next time we should involve politicians in this discussion. And actually, two quick questions, one for Sarah. In fact, speaking of regulation, if she can point out to a model that she deems successful in Europe, I don't know, maybe Germany, but I'm sure you know much more. And for Simone, I was thinking what you mentioned really interesting, like unionizing and getting people unionized in the age of immaterial labor. It's very difficult because you don't have a physical space like you would have in Fordism, like the factory. And so it clicked into my mind something I saw a couple of days ago about Amazon taking over the traffic lights of, I don't remember which city, a small town, I think, in the US, because they do not want people to stop, you know, even with their cars or in the parking lot. So they are designing the urban space so that people won't have any place where to have public assembly, not even a casual one, you know, a random one. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this, because also with the
It's not me, right? She froze for everybody.
Okay.
We get the point. So you want to make some quick comments, Sarah, on this Adela introduce.
Yeah, can you hear me? The audio is because it comes and goes.
Yeah.
Yes, it works.
Okay. No, because I don't know if I'm freezing or you're freezing. Yeah, I was just briefly about regulation. I think it's interesting because often when we talk about, you know, platforms and platform economy, and we might get the impression, you know, that then the issue of regulation is extremely complicated and difficult, while it's actually, in Airbnb's case, it's not. It's very simple. So I really like the approach San Francisco took back in 2015, that I think San Francisco was probably the first city to study and to regulate Airbnb, just basically establishing, you know, the time limit and the number of listings, you know, you could rent. So clearly separating what's, you know, what they call occasional and what is professional hosting. So, and then, you know, and then they actually forced Airbnb to modify the website so they could, you know, insert the license number in the website. You know, a series of very simple measures like this. But what I find interesting is, you know, they created a new office in the, you know, the public administration. So they had a new, you know, office with staff, paid staff to you know, to deal. And that's I think that's kind of also symbolic. That means, you know, that cities are up to date with what's going on. And that's a huge problem we have, you know, with regulation, because we're always chasing these kind of, you know, so-called innovations. And so I like that approach, and it actually worked, because when everything was then implemented, then the number of listings dropped by half. And Barcelona has been similar. Of course, it's difficult because new forms of then similar to Airbnb then continue to emerge, and so the city is always kind to, you know, track down different kinds of illegal activity. But anyway, I mean, I would cite that as a very good example, San Francisco.
Simon, do you want to?
Hi. I don't know if
okay, I'm up.
Alberto, you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm continuously dropping. So Simone, you want to be the point on
Yes.
On the physical spaces for organization?
Yes. So let's say we talked about easy new cases in the sense that the office space for developers, or they're rented, but they're still visible in the public space. They wear a uniform, they go around, very often they meet in front of the, like waiting for food to pick up the food in restaurants that support multiple platforms. They are very colorful, and so, you know, the word of mouth goes on in there. And that's how they organize mostly, because despite not having easy access immediately to their colleagues, they can still find them in this way. A much more complicated case is data labelers or people working with Amazon Mechanical Turk, and all these kind of online work of menial tasks done only through the internet, where you offload stuff that you cannot automate to people, usually in the third world. This is an invisible, gigantic mass of workers that is also complemented by precarious workers in the West that are hired to do the same job when it requires higher quality. For example, in Italy, Google has a small army of data labelers that are hired under like by third-party companies under a different role, under an NDA, not to disclose that they're working for Google. And maybe there is one in each subsidiary company or two, and their colleagues have nothing to do with Google. So how you organize that? And that's an open question, because most of their work, especially the crowd workers in the third world, it happens all through a web interface controlled by the company, and they are not visible in the public space. Their colleagues maybe live on the other side of the world, so there's no density. And that's, at the moment, for what I know, for how I'm following the topic, is a totally open answer. There's no perspective on how to reach these workers, except through communities online and other very imperfect tools that require them to engage first and look for solutions that I think that usually they don't do for a variety of reasons.
Okay, thank you very much for these final comments. Unfortunately, we want to like to stay 2 hours, so I also saw that Julia, one of our students, make a point in the chat. And has been a really fruitful discussion on platforms, and we discussed again the limits, the problems, the inequalities that this kind of new forms of this new form of organization of our lives brought, especially throughout the pandemics. But luckily, we're also capable of discussing some alternatives and the constraints. So for sure, like this kind of point about the proximity, social proximity, the problems within the financial market. So the neoliberalist logic is also forcing the small co-ops to fail, because within an unregulated neoliberal system, also for these small co-ops, will be very impossible to survive. It would be impossible to survive. Okay, so I want to thank all our participants, all the people that made possible this event. I would like to remind you that on the 30th of March, we're going to have our second appointment, the Queer Data with this kind of wonderful performances from with poets from all over the world. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully I'll see you all at the next event and in the subsequent one for sure.
Thank you. And to stay in touch, please email DDD, like Digital Delights and Disturbances, at johncabot.edu to stay in touch about future events or ask questions. And you can see the live streaming, the recording on our GCU TV on our channel. And yeah, and now the email is on the chat. And thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, everybody, actually, the audience as well, like participant, actually, not the audience. Yeah, and everybody who made this event possible. Thank you for staying with us for 2 hours. It's a lot.
And hopefully we'll see you all in person in Rome at a certain moment in the future.
Hopefully. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.